My husband Bob and I are in our second year of marriage. I wasn't great at many things, but I was good at cooking. Your cooking is really delicious, he once said. That compliment on the lunch I made for our first date was what made me fall for him. After 6 months of dating, we got married, and I left my job to be a full-time housewife. My father-in-law passed away about a year ago, so now it's just my mother-in-law, Bob, and myself living together. I was hoping we could live alone as newlyweds, even for a short while, but I couldn't refuse when he said, "Mom's been feeling vulnerable since Dad passed away." Soon after we started our married life, I realized my mother-in-law didn't like me. I had seen bullies at my old job, but she was worse. She would always find fault with whatever I do. If I was doing the cleaning, she would point out every little spot that I missed and say, "What's this brown spot? Can't you see it?" Once she forced me to get the unremovable stain off the floor and made me wipe it. I wasn't allowed to stop until Bob came home from work. She would wake me up in the middle of the night and demand, "We're almost out of plastic wrap. Go and buy some now. Otherwise, I won't be able to sleep just by thinking about it." Since the grocery store was closed, I had to run to the closest convenience store. If I tried to wake Bob, she would explode in anger, saying, "How dare you wake your tired husband? House chores are the wife's job." So just to shut her up, I had no choice but to obey. These midnight calls were physically exhausting, but having my things thrown away or hidden was even worse mentally. "I don't know where your stuff is. Maybe you left it somewhere?" Whenever I couldn't find my belongings, she would say that. It's awful to blame others for your own mistakes. I can never forget how shocked I was when I found my favorite cardigan in the trash can a few days after. When I told Bob what happened, he just sighed heavily. "Well, you can just buy a new one," he said. I also tried in vain to persuade him to have a word with her. Not knowing what else I could do, I bought a safe with the money I'd saved before I married Bob. I kept my belongings out of her sight, especially my valuables, which I stored in the safe. It's crazy to distrust your own family like you do. I'd like to see the face of the person who raised you. Her harsh tone intensified, and every time she opened her mouth, I had to brace myself for the inevitable verbal attack. She would criticize every meal I cooked. Too bland, or no taste at all. When I tried making the taste stronger, she complained it was too spicy. I couldn't help asking my husband for his opinion on the taste, as I wasn't sure about my cooking skills any longer. "Mom has very strong food preferences. I think it's delicious," he said. Cooking, once a joy, became a chore. After a year of being bullied by my mother-in-law, I had an epiphany. My staying home all the time was the problem. Realizing this, I decided to start working part-time. I quit my job to be a housewife as requested by Bob when we got married, but if staying at home was this painful, I wouldn't have left it so easily. Despite a slight gap in my career, I was valued for my quick learning skills at my part-time job, and it simply felt good to be praised again. However, as I spent less time at home, my mother-in-law began to focus her harassment during breakfast and dinner times. She used to eat despite her complaining, but began leaving most of the food untouched, barely taking a bite before leaving the table. I can't even remember how many times she accidentally knocked over her soup bowl. When I swallowed my pride and asked her what was wrong with the meal, she'd laugh, saying, "You think asking will solve everything, don't you? Why don't you try thinking for yourself?" I was left alone to clean up her leftovers at the dinner table. But one day, my mother-in-law really crossed the line. While we were having dinner, she suddenly stood up, took her plate in her hand, and headed to the kitchen. As I looked up in surprise, our eyes met, and she smirked. "What?" By the time I realized what was happening, she had already thrown the meal I made into the trash can. "This is such an awful-looking meal. The dog food would even look better than this," she scoffed. I looked at Bob in disbelief, but he just ignored me and continued eating. I just couldn't believe what I saw, so I rushed to the trash can. I opened its lid and looked at the ruined food. "This is terrible." I turned around to see Bob, but he wouldn't even look at me. She probably wasn't feeling well. That was how he dismissed his mother's actions. How could she throw the food away right in front of the person who made it? As I became more upset, Bob scratched his head in annoyance and said, "Look, I have work tomorrow. Unlike you with your part-time job, I'm a full-time employee, working hard from morning to night. What's wrong with doing a part-time job? I work, cook at home, and then have my cooking thrown away by your mother. My voice broke with emotion, and he sighed deeply. Lisa, you're becoming a nag. Mom's probably irritated by your nagging too, you know. And if it's that bad, then you shouldn't be cooking anymore. After saying that, Bob walked into his bedroom, leaving me staring at his back in disbelief. I finally realized that he didn't care about me at all. Something inside of me just snapped. The next day, I prepared breakfast as usual, and let both Bob and my mother-in-law know their breakfast was ready. Bob sat down to eat, but my mother-in-law grabbed her plate and said, "Not even a dog would eat this in the morning." Then she threw her breakfast in the trash can. Without a word, I stood up and took away the breakfast I prepared for Bob. What? I will have it. I quickly sat down and started eating his breakfast. I stopped reacting to my mother-in-law's actions and completely ignored how upset Bob was. Hey, why are you eating my breakfast? What are you doing? They both exclaimed. I looked at them innocently and replied. Well, since your mother said a dog wouldn't even eat this, you shouldn't be eating it. I will take responsibility for what I have made and eat it myself. No, I didn't say that. But you didn't deny what your mother said, did you? Bob opened his mouth but seemed unable to find anything to say. Lisa, stop talking nonsense and make Bob's breakfast. I looked straight at my mother-in-law with a smile. I'm very sorry that I have been serving you the sort of food that a dog wouldn't even eat. Don't worry, I won't cook for you ever again. I grabbed my knife and fork, finished eating breakfast, and stood up. Bob said, Wait, Lisa, what about my breakfast? Eat whatever you like. Then I left the house quickly. I usually return home around 5 p.m., but on that day, I had a few things to do after work. So by the time I got home, it was already past 8 p.m. Oh, you're very late. We've been waiting for you. Really, where on earth have you been? Bob and my mother-in-law complained, looking very hungry. Oh, haven't you two eaten yet? I already had my dinner. My mother-in-law's face turned red with surprise and anger. How dare you eat alone? Well, I did say I wouldn't cook for you anymore. Or were you looking forward to my terrible cooking? How dare you talk back to me like that? In frustration, she slammed the table, but then quickly regained her composure as she came up with a brilliant idea. If you're not cooking, then return the food money. Bob has been paying for all the living expenses, so you should pay him back every penny you spend on your food. I couldn't help but laugh at what she just confidently said. What's so funny? Since I started working part-time, I've been paying not just for food but all living expenses. It was Bob's suggestion. Bob said to me, Mom isn't happy about your working, but if you pay the living expenses, it might calm her down. It had been over a year since I started part-time work. That means I had been covering the living expenses for the last half of our married life. My mother-in-law, apparently unaware of this, looked shocked and turned to Bob. Is that true, Bob? Well, you wanted more pocket money, so... Bob, with a pitifully soft voice, making excuses. He had me provide the living expenses and use the extra money for his mother's allowance. You seem to have been spending quite a lot on extravagant meals. What? In the mailbox I found a flyer for regular customers at some lavish restaurant. I had thought my mother-in-law made her own lunch, but after seeing the flyer, I had a suspicion and found some receipts from that restaurant in a trash can. Shouldn't the proper thing be to pay back all the living expenses I've provided? After all, it was my hard-earned money. Don't worry, I'll be sure to bill you properly. With a full smile, I said to my mother-in-law, who was trembling with anger. Hey, what do you mean by billing? Bob, perhaps sensing something, turned pale and stood up. I want a divorce. And of course, I'll make sure I ask for alimony. Divorce. He muttered in shock, but soon realized something and brightened up. Do you think you can afford to live on your own with what you earn from your part-time job? He probably thought I would struggle financially. About that part-time job, I've been offered a full-time position. What? I've also decided where I live. My actual plan was to commute from my parents' home for a while, but what I said seemed to give him quite a shock. I'll get my lawyer to handle the proceedings from now on. Leaving those words behind, I went to my bedroom, grabbed the luggage I had packed the night before. Bob seemed to be in a state of shock and was still standing beside the dining table. I ignored and walked past him. "Lisa, I'm sorry." I stopped and turned around. "Sorry for what?" "What do you mean, what?" "It was hard to take sides between you and Mom." "I never said anything bad about your cooking, did I?" He doesn't understand anything at all. In the end, I truly realized I had been blind. It's not about taking sides. You chose to say nothing when the food being thrown away, and when I was being harassed by your mother over and over. Despite my pleas, you never helped me. Your playing the victim doesn't change the fact that you hurt me. I reproved him. Bob started crying bitterly, realizing the gravity of his sorrow. I quickly glanced at the pathetic man and headed towards the front door. As I reached for the door, my mother-in-law called out to stop me. "I never intended for things to go this way. I just wanted to give you a little advice, although I admit it went too far at times." I was amazed at how oblivious she was to the severity of her actions. "I've looked after you all these times, and it's disappointing that the last thing I hear from you is such an excuse-like response. From now on, you won't have to worry about being caught for spending a lot of money on delicious meals." My mother-in-law stood frozen, her eyes wide open, as if her breath had stopped. I returned to my parents' house. They warmly welcomed me as they were already aware of my situation. According to my lawyer, everyone in the neighborhood knew that my mother-in-law was incapable of household chores. Apparently, my father-in-law had managed the housework when he was still alive. After his passing, Bob, now my ex-husband, and his mother lived on takeaways and eating out. To them, I was a convenient housekeeper to exploit. The news about our divorce quickly spread throughout the town. Eventually, it was known to the bosses and colleagues of Bob, causing him considerable embarrassment. Bob and his mother are now in financial trouble, having hardly saved any money and squandering it all, and are panicking over the alimony they owe me. Now that everybody knows about their mistreatment of me, finding a new housekeeper has become impossible. They can't even afford the kind of meals they used to have. Bob, unrelenting, kept texting and asking me if we could get back together. I also received text messages from my mother-in-law, full of excuses, but they were repetitive and uninteresting, so I stopped reading them. Now, I enjoy cooking for my family, making sweets and baking cakes on weekends. I often share them with my colleagues. Surrounded by those who appreciate what I make, I believe that will help me restore my confidence in cooking. With this new hope, my heart swells with anticipation. I'll cheat on you. When we decided to get married, my fiancé said this to me. I might be called foolish for not breaking up with him after he said such a thing a while ago. But I really wanted to get married, no matter what. I've had my share of hardships because of it, but I don't regret it. My name is Anne, I'm 45 years old and currently single, actually divorced twice. My first marriage was when I was 26, but after 2 years of marriage, I couldn't get pregnant, and it turned out the problem was with me. Even after treatment, I was told my chances of getting pregnant were only 10% to 20%. My husband, who loved kids, was terribly disappointed, and 6 months after that diagnosis, he asked for a divorce. The shock of potentially not being able to have children had not yet faded, and the word a divorce felt like a death sentence to me. I begged, saying I wanted to try for the slim chance, willing to undergo treatment. Divorce him, don't you dare make our son unhappy. But even my in-laws came to me. So, with a heavy heart, I divorced. A year later, still not over it, Michael from my work approached me. He was one of the top 3 salespeople, handsome, and naturally popular with the female staff, but to me, he was from a different world. Moreover, I felt I shouldn't get involved with men, so I never took a special interest in him. However, my attitude seemed to pique Michael's interest. Eventually, worn down by his experienced approach, we started dating a few months later. But to Michael, I was just one of many, and even while we were dating, there were always other women in the picture. I was about to end it, realizing it was a fruitless relationship, when I found out I was pregnant. The surprise and joy I felt at that moment. I doubted it several times, wondering if it was a lie or a dream. Even with the hospital's confirmation, I bought a pregnancy test kit to recheck. I was going to be a mother. The thought brought me to tears. But once I calmed down, I started worrying about what to do next. Abortion was out of the question, but how was I going to raise this child? There are various supports for single mothers, but I was overwhelmed with doubts about whether I could do it on my own. I thought about discussing it with Michael, but I was sure he'd say he didn't want the child or suggest breaking up. Having no friends to talk to about such things, I eventually reached out to my brother. He was in his 3rd year of marriage, enjoying life with his wife while living with our parents. He was overjoyed to hear about my pregnancy. "If anything happens, we'll support you, so go ahead and have the baby." He said so. Encouraged by his words, I finally mustered the courage to tell Michael when he came to my apartment. He was silent for a while. "Is it a boy or a girl?" he asked. "I don't know yet, but around the 17th week, we should know," I replied. "Oh, I see. I would have preferred a boy, but a girl's fine. We can always have a son-in-law," he mumbled. Then he asked out of the blue. "So, and, do you want to marry me?" he asked me suddenly. I replied, "Of course, it's definitely better for a child to have a father." When I answered with a pounding heart, Michael had a few words to say. "All right, let's get married," he said. "Really? Are you sure?" I was surprised. And then, Michael dropped another bombshell. "I'll marry you, but I'm going to cheat." I was stunned by his words. "If you don't like that, then no marriage. I won't acknowledge the child either." With those cold eyes fixed on me, I was so shocked I couldn't speak, and he just left, leaving me there. Panicking, I thought about many things. Michael doesn't love me, I'm just convenient for him, and he'll never stop playing around with other women. But a child needs a father, and I'm not confident about being a single mother. These thoughts raced through my mind, making it hard to decide. But this child is a miracle. I want to make this child happier than anyone else. I no longer love Michael, but a father is still better for a child. I don't know what the future holds, but I'll take a chance on this marriage. With that resolve, I remarried Michael at 34. Just as he declared, Michael's affairs never ceased. Though I was prepared, I sometimes expressed dissatisfaction with him even after our daughter Lily was born, as he never changed his ways. He would always get furious. "You should be grateful I married a trashy woman like you. Just shut up and take care of the kid," he would shout, sometimes even becoming violent. The bullying from my in-laws, especially my mother-in-law, was also terrible. Initially, she was happy about the marriage when she learned her son, who was always womanizing and not serious about marriage, was going to have a child. However, it seems she grew to dislike me more and more, as I was neither from a good family nor particularly beautiful. She criticized everything I did, from my poor cooking skills to my lackluster cleaning. And when I gave birth to a girl, the bullying reached its peak. She even came to the maternity hospital and yelled, "Unbelievable. You gave birth to a girl, deceiving us. You can't have more kids, right? Just leave," she yelled. I was stunned and replied, "But Michael said he was fine with a girl." Well, if she had turned out to be a beauty like Michael, we could have married her off to some rich guy. But who would have thought you'd give birth to such an ugly child? I couldn't believe her words and looked at Michael. Then he said unbelievably things. "Yes, she's super ugly and looks nothing like me." "You sure you didn't cheat, Anne?" He said this casually. "There's no way. I'm willing to do a DNA test," I shouted. "Divorce is always welcome. As for alimony and child support, let's call it even since you gave birth to such an ugly child." Michael said something unbelievable. "I married him to make my child Lily happy. Because I thought a child needs a father." These thoughts swirled in my mind. But as I thought in my confused state, I began to doubt if Lily would be happy with such a father and grandparents. I was anxious about raising her alone and clung to Michael, but there are many women out there bravely raising their children as single mothers. Even my brother and his wife said they would help. "And you lack courage," I scolded myself and decided to get a divorce. As I researched, I found out that if I took Lily and sued, Michael would be obligated to pay child support. If he didn't pay, his wages could be garnished. When I emailed this to Michael, after talking with his parents, the situation suddenly changed a few hours later. "We won't get a divorce," came the reply from Michael. I thought he was worried about his company finding out, but then his mother called me. "After thinking about it, you're like a free housekeeper for us. It's much more beneficial to keep you than to let you go. We can have the heir to our family from one of Michael's mistresses." She said this, laughing heartily. I don't need to be loyal to such a family. With a firm decision, I started to record the emotional abuse from my husband and his family, bit by bit. Then, just when I had gathered substantial evidence and was thinking of consulting a lawyer, Michael suddenly passed away 3 years into our marriage. When I was informed that he died during an affair, in a truly embarrassing way, his parents went almost insane, but I couldn't help but laugh. "What's so funny? This is all your fault." "Huh? How is it my fault?" "You're a failure, that's why Michael cheated. His cheating was a chronic issue, not my fault. He had affairs with many women even before we got married." "Shut up. It's because you didn't take care of Michael's health that he had a heart attack." "What health care? He barely came home." I was surprisingly strong. "I'll fight to the end to protect myself and my daughter." Perhaps because of such exchanges, I wasn't allowed to attend the wake or the funeral. During the funeral, the in-laws were bad-mouthing me to the relatives, but it was they who received cold stares, as the news of Michael's embarrassing death had leaked. While I rested at home during the funeral, my brother emailed me. "I need to discuss something. Can you contact me after the funeral?" He knew about the treatment I received from Michael and his family and disliked them, so he didn't attend the funeral. When I called him immediately, he was outraged that I was barred from the funeral and made a proposal for the sake of me and my child. A few days after the funeral, I started packing my room and preparing to return to my parents' house. I also filed a termination of the marriage kinship document to cut ties with my in-laws. Unaware of this, my mother-in-law ordered me to do thank you visits and write letters of thanks to the funeral attendees. It's ridiculous for someone who didn't attend the funeral to make thank you visits. It would make your family a laughingstock. I ignored her. Also ignored the funeral home's payment. Then, a few days later, I left with my daughter to my parents' house without telling anyone. The next day, my furious mother-in-law called. "Where are you right now?" "At my parents' house." "I've already moved my stuff in, so I won't be returning there." "What nonsense are you talking about? From now on, you're supposed to take care of us." I knew she had been having trouble with her legs recently, but to think she'd expect me to care for her after all the bullying was unbelievable. "I've already completed the procedures, and we are now strangers to your family. Whatever happens to you in the future is none of my concern." Then, she shrieked over the phone. "That's not unrelated. What about his inheritance?" "His inheritance? Of course, all the assets built during our marriage go to me. It's the law. If you have any objections, feel free to take it to court." After saying that, my mother-in-law slammed the phone. I couldn't help but smile, feeling I had finally retaliated. However, about 6 months later, apparently advised by someone, she called again. "Don't get too comfortable. Lily has a duty to take care of us." "No, she doesn't. It's the law. Lily and us are blood relatives, she has to care for us in our old age. Return Lily to us immediately." She was confident. But she was speechless at my next words. "There is no such duty. Lily is no longer related to you by blood." In fact, Lily had become the special adoptive child of my brother and his wife. Special adoption means completely severing ties with the original parents and relatives, becoming the child of the new parents. My sister-in-law, who had the same condition as me and couldn't have children, pleaded to adopt Lily as their special child. After about 6 months of custody, Lily recently became their child. It was really hard to let go of precious Lily. But if I didn't, I could see you tying her down and making her unhappy in the future. That's why I accepted my brother and his wife's strong wish. You are horrible. My mother-in-law screamed. No wonder, as Michael was their only child, and with their declining health, they now had no one close to take care of them. You won't be bothered by us anymore, so please enjoy your retirement with your husband, I said and hung up. I don't regret my decision. Before the adoption, I had divided Michael's inheritance for Lily. She was 3 then and is now 11, growing up healthily with my brother as her father and my sister-in-law as her mother. I sometimes visit my parents' house and interact with Lily as her aunt, and that's enough for me to be happy. It's because you can't get pregnant. That's what my husband said, blaming me for his affair and asking for a divorce. I was furious. He thought everything would be settled with the divorce, but he was mistaken. The real drama starts now. My name is Susan. I'm 43 and divorced a few months ago. My ex-husband, David, is 48, and we didn't have any children. Sadly, the reason was on my end. But the original cause was partly David's fault too. We married when I was 33, already close to the age for high-risk pregnancy. I wanted to start trying for a baby as soon as possible. I went to the gynecologist to make sure there were no issues with my health. Unfortunately, David got a big project at work, making it impossible to try for a baby. He was assigned to set up a new branch office in another state and had to stay there during the week, only returning home on weekends. David asked me, I'll try to come home on weekends, but if we have a kid, you'll be mostly on your own. Are you okay with that? Not feeling confident about managing alone, I hesitated to answer. We couldn't count on help from our families either, as they lived far away. Believing David's words that he might return in a year, I gave up on trying for a baby for the time being. But his assignment ended up lasting 3 years. When he finally returned, we eagerly started trying to conceive, but with no success. A re-examination at the hospital revealed that my ovarian function had declined, likely due to aging. Though there were options like hormone therapy, the chances of pregnancy were slim. I was devastated but knew it wasn't David's fault. He apologized repeatedly. I suggested that we keep trying naturally and enjoy life just the two of us, and he agreed. However, David's attitude began to change over time. Seeing families out together, he would say enviously, "That must be nice, the perfect family picture." His words also grew harsher. There are several single mothers at my work who manage despite everything. They get support from the government. You should have just gone for it, he would say, indirectly criticizing my reluctance. Certainly such women are increasing and I respect them very much. But I didn't have the confidence to do it myself. Was it my fault? After about 5 years of tension, David suddenly asked, "What do you think about adoption?" Adoption? That's out of the blue, I replied. Well, I know a girl who got pregnant before marriage. Why don't we adopt her baby, he suggested. Stunned by his bizarre proposal, I was silent until he explained, I just really want a child. When I heard that girl got pregnant, it immediately came to mind. Adoption, huh? I hadn't considered that. But something about what he said nagged at me. A girl? An acquaintance? I'd understand if it was a relative, but what does he mean by a young girl acquaintance? Trying to sound casual, I asked, "Oh? So she's young?" He replied, "She's just 24, a beautiful girl. So the baby inside her is sure to be healthy and attractive too. Could she be someone from his office? But would a woman in her early 20s discuss such a personal matter with a male boss over 45? Or could she be his mistress? That's when I first suspected he might be cheating. Observing him, I noticed several suspicious behaviors. He was constantly glued to his cell phone, coming home late, wearing underwear I hadn't bought, and faint traces of sweet perfume. But what really convinced me was him skipping our anniversary. We didn't have a wedding ceremony due to our jobs, but we registered our marriage on December 24th, Christmas Eve, and always celebrated it as our anniversary and Christmas. Yet this year, he chose a work party over our tradition. I believed his words that he would come home early and waited alone with the Christmas tree decorated, a cake and Christmas dinner prepared, and a gift for him. It was heartbreaking to wait alone. No response to my numerous calls. He finally contacted me the next morning. His voice sounded too cheerful as he said, Sorry. I accidentally overslept at a friend's place. I replied, Okay, I get it. I threw away the cake, Christmas dinner, and your present. He casually responded, What a waste. No need to sulk just because I missed our anniversary. I'll make it up to you. I retorted, No, it's fine. You might as well not come back home. Why not live with the person you were with last night? He seemed to be still intoxicated or lost in the memories of last night, saying, Hey, don't say that. Besides, her apartment is small, unknowingly digging his own grave. I'm going home early tonight, Susan, forgive me, the old man apologized to me in a brusque tone, which made me want to vomit. That evening, my husband came home with a face as if nothing had happened, and again began talking about the adoption. Let's start the process soon. She wants to decide quickly. I asked, Why are you so eager to adopt a stranger's child? What about her partner or parents? Can I talk to her or her parents first? He became flustered and stammered, That's because. Right, the guy ran away. And apparently, she has no parents. I decided to test him. I'm sorry, but I'm not interested in raising a child born from a reckless woman and a foolish man. He blurted out in anger, What? You're insulting me and Sarah. There, he fell right into my trap. Realizing his affair was exposed, he finally understood. I said, You could have just asked for a divorce, but making me raise and this is Sarah a girl's child? That's called cuckooing. Apparently, Sarah, unable to raise a child but still wanting to give birth, had convinced him of this plan. He said, It's your fault for not being able to have kids. You should be grateful I'm letting you raise my child. That was it. I snapped and said clearly. Then let's go to court and see who's right. He lost his temper too. Fine. I don't want to see your face again. Divorce. Get out. Hearing that, I placed the divorce papers I had received earlier in front of him. Caught off guard, he signed them, unable to back down. I didn't want to spend another second with him, gathered my essentials, filed the papers, and went back to my parents' house. A week later, he called me. Your stuff is still here. Pack it up and get out. Take everything. I informed him I'd come with my lawyer over the weekend. Shocked by the mention of a lawyer, he reluctantly agreed when I threatened to go to his office unless we settled on alimony and property division. Eventually, we agreed on a settlement of $150,000 in total. But the next day, on my way back from a part-time job, a young woman approached me. It was the infamous Sarah. She was David's type, short, with long hair, and cute, but her heavy makeup made her look tacky. I can't pay it all at once. She yelled in a shrill voice as soon as she opened her mouth. It's none of your business. David agreed to pay in front of the lawyer, I replied. He actually hesitated, but he didn't want to deal with me any longer and eventually gave in. Why didn't you call me there? She demanded. That's something you should ask David, I said, unimpressed. She mumbled, I thought we could just ditch the alimony, sneakily. So, she planned to make partial payments and then disappear by moving or changing jobs. Well, sorry for you, but you can live in that house, right? I remarked. That's David's house, isn't it? What about the mortgage? She asked. It's in David's name, and the mortgage is fully paid off, I informed her. Well, I guess that's okay, then, she said. She is backing off with a tone that suggested she was up to something. I think she is up to something. But whatever it wasn't my concern anymore. 2 years later, David contacted me. Please, lend me some money, he begged. What? I asked in disbelief. Those two are spending like crazy, he exclaimed. Apparently, Sarah's mother had conveniently moved up to the city and was staying in that house. According to Sarah, David wanted a child, so I gave birth, but I never said I'd raise it. Once she realized she couldn't pawn the child off on me, she said, raising a child is hard, so I'm calling mom, and brought her mother from the countryside. David initially welcomed her, thinking she'd help with the childcare, but it turned out neither she nor Sarah were doing much parenting and instead spent their time frolicking. "Well, knowing her mom, that figures," I said, unimpressed. Then David, who still seems to like Sarah, suddenly yelled at me, "Don't insult Sarah," he suddenly yelled at me. "She agreed to marry an old man like me and even had my child. It's all your fault for not being able to have kids," he accused, bringing up the past. Okay, I can't argue with that. "But can I say something?" I asked. "What now?" he grumbled. "Remember when I went for a fertility check 3 years ago? You were tested too, remember?" I reminded him. "Yeah, I guess." He recalled. "I went to hear the results alone." "Actually, they said you had issues too," I revealed. "What?" he gasped in shock. The gynecologist had mentioned that for his age, David's sperm quality was quite poor, making pregnancy unlikely even if I had no issues. I had learned of my problems first, so I assumed I was the main cause and didn't want to hurt him by revealing his results. "That can't be. Sarah got pregnant," he argued in denial. "Whether it's your child or not, I don't know," I said, silencing him. His reaction suggested he might have had doubts himself. I rubbed salt in his wound. "Even if a DNA test proves it's not your child, it might not change anything." "What do you mean?" he asked, confused. "The child is over a year old, right?" I pointed out. "So what?" he pressed. "Current law doesn't recognize paternity disavowal suits filed after a year since birth," I explained. "If discovered after a year, a different lawsuit is needed, often leading to disputes. Even if a DNA test proves no biological relation, there's a chance of losing the case." "Why?" "The test clearly shows it's not my biological child," he protested. "Well, there's a Supreme Court ruling. Even after divorce, the man had to pay child support," I explained thoroughly. Hearing this, David just muttered, "It can't be. It's not true." In a trembling voice. "Sorry for your troubles. According to neighbors, those two, or rather 3, are constantly battling every day. It's unclear if the child is David's or not. We're getting divorced. Get out. Sell this house and pay child support. I'm never leaving. You get out." Such arguments are heard daily, and they're reportedly quite intense. They've had the police called on them multiple times, and both women have even been detained. As for me, I'm currently living with my parents. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm enjoying my single life, keeping busy with work and hobbies. This time, it's about a story where my husband got belittled by my mother-in-law for his education level. Humans sure are foolish, huh? My name is Erica. I live with my husband, who I've been married to for 3 years, and our kitten, Bella. My mother-in-law believes that academic credentials are everything. She was always so proud that her son, Kevin, graduated from a prestigious university. In our small town, where there's only one convenience store, she's quite well known and has a deep connection with the neighbors. At neighborhood gatherings, my mother-in-law mostly brags about her son. The woman who marries such a son must also have an impressive educational background. The first time I met her when we announced our engagement, she immediately asked, "Which university did you graduate from?" "I'm a Harvard grad, you know." When I told her the name of my university, she made a visibly disgusted face. Apparently, she hadn't heard of it. In her mind, an unfamiliar university equals Tier 3 university, and she assumed I was from a low-ranked school. Since then, she seemed to have issues with my education, but while she did allow the marriage, she began to mistreat me afterward. She would wait until my husband and father-in-law weren't around and then say near me, "Why did Kevin have to marry someone with such a low education?" She said, "Someone like him isn't a match for you." She suggested, "You must have forced the marriage or blackmailed him into it." She even said, "It's a pity for any child born to a mother like you. Better not to have them at all." These were the kinds of things she would say every time we met. Luckily, we weren't living together at the time, but she would still come over whenever she had free time just to mock my education and leave. My mother-in-law seemed satisfied, but it stressed me out so much that I started getting gray hairs. She even gossiped about me to the neighbors. She is saying things like, Erica can't even do basic math, or she can only recite the alphabet up to H. So, I often found myself being laughed at by the locals. I thought about talking back many times, but if I did, she would likely make up something about me getting violent and spread it around the neighborhood. So, I endured it all without telling anyone. One day, my in-laws decided to rebuild their house. It seems my father-in-law hurt his back and they wanted to make the house more accessible. We were grateful for everything my father-in-law had done for us, so we offered to pay for it. My mother-in-law planned a big celebration with the neighbors for the housewarming, and of course, I ended up being the one to prepare everything. I'll help you, my husband said. But mother-in-law was like, come here, Kevin. I want to show off my highly educated son, and dragged him away. Someone with your low education should at least be good at cooking, so get on with the preparations. With that last remark. During the party, my mother-in-law was overjoyed, as expected. She started her usual bragging to everyone. My son built this house. What a wonderful and dutiful son he is. I wonder who raised such a child. Oh, that's me. The old ladies in the neighborhood sounded envious. Encouraged by this, she continued. And then there's his wife. She didn't contribute a penny but acts like she owns the place. She doesn't even want to give me grandchildren, the wicked woman. Then she turned her usual hateful gaze my way and kept on insulting me. What's up? I replied bluntly, annoyed. There she goes, that's the problem with uneducated wives. She hasn't had any kids yet, she's greedy for money, and she's probably eyeing our inheritance. She even accused me, I bet she put something in today's meal. None of you should eat it, as she belittled the food I prepared. Too bad, there's nothing in it. And hey, she was gobbling down my cooking herself. Besides, with her, even if something was in it, she'd probably survive just fine. She's got the resilience of, well, something really tough. She whispered with a sneer, well, can't expect much from Erica's kids. They'll have those low education genes mixed in. My mother-in-law whispered with a smirk. She is trying to keep it from my husband and father-in-law's ears. She always harassed me without letting others catch on. That part really infuriated me. The ladies around us chimed in with laughter, agreeing with her, that's right. When I glared at them, they awkwardly looked away. I wish they wouldn't agree with her if they felt bad about it. She's not some powerful figure. Or maybe she has something on them. Even as I thought about this, the insults from my mother-in-law didn't stop. I wondered how long this life would go on. Do I have to endure her bullying forever? For what purpose? Lost in these thoughts, I soon came to a decision. I can't stand it anymore. I suddenly shouted, startling my mother-in-law and the kitten, Bella. Sorry for scaring you. I'll give you some treats later, I said to the kitten. I then told my mother-in-law, you hate me, right? You don't want a child born from someone with low education like me, do you? And who knows what would happen to them after they're born? Maybe they'll be abandoned in the mountains? Oh, scary, scary. What? I would never do such a thing, she exclaimed. And by the way, I'm going to have you pay back every penny I contributed to building this house. I calmly informed her. My mother-in-law was shaken by my sudden words. What nonsense are you talking about all of a sudden, she said. Her voice echoing throughout the house. This caught the attention of my husband and father-in-law, who hurried over to us. The surrounding people also looked at us curiously, so I decided to fully confront my mother-in-law. This was a good opportunity to expose her wrongdoings. What's all the yelling about? My husband asked in a panic. Listen to this. Erica says she didn't contribute any money, but now she wants me to pay back the money for building the house. All eyes suddenly turned to me. But you said you didn't want a child from me, right, mother-in-law? Right, ladies? I asked the nearby women. Yes, that's true. She always says that, they admitted reluctantly. She said she doesn't need those low education genes, they added. Caught off guard by their betrayal. My mother-in-law stood there with her mouth agape. She probably thought they would never turn on her. Serves her right. Why should I quietly endure bullying from you? I'm not your tool for stress relief. I turned back to my mother-in-law, my voice filled with anger. My husband and father-in-law gasped in shock at the revelation. Have you been bullying Erica? Don't mess with me, my father-in-law said, his face turning red with anger as he confronted my mother-in-law. Despite being intimidated by my father-in-law's unusual anger, my mother-in-law tried to argue back. But it's true. A child from low-educated Erica won't be any good. Besides, she's just a housewife living off my son. I haven't said anything wrong, she shouted. But noticing the cold stares from my husband and father-in-law, her face paled. Yes, in front of them, she always played the good mother-in-law. Her thick skin, thicker than her makeup, had been completely peeled off. My husband sighed and said to my mother-in-law with a cold stare. Mom, what are you talking about? Erica graduated from Harvard, she's way smarter than me. The room went completely silent. What do you mean? The university Erica told me she attended before we got married was some unknown third-rate one. My mother-in-law was in a panic. But indeed, I did graduate from Harvard. The university she misheard as some unknown third-rate college was actually Cambridge University. Even people not familiar with universities normally know about this world-renowned institution. After graduating, I went to the UK for further studies and completed my master's degree there, so that's my highest qualification. When my mother-in-law asked about my alma mater, I didn't think too much and just mentioned that university's name. I never imagined this misunderstanding would lead to such mistreatment. Given that she's a Harvard graduate and values education so highly, you'd think she'd know about Cambridge being among the top 5 universities in the world. The misunderstanding had led to this point, but I had no intention of correcting it now. I had lost any desire to have a long-term relationship with such a mother-in-law. After all, a person's worth isn't determined by their educational background. My parents didn't go to college, but I respect them immensely. So, I hadn't planned on bringing up my education, but this turned out to be a good opportunity. After all, my actions made my husband angry on my behalf. He said, "Look here. This house's funds included $100,000 from Erica's savings, which you, Mom, looked down upon. How could you insult her like that? And about your college, it's just some college near Harvard, not Harvard itself. That's not called being a Harvard grad, Mother. Now's not the time to talk about that. It's about the money. There's no way a housewife like Erica could have that kind of money. Erica's not just a housewife. If anything, she earns several times more than me." "What did you say?" The mother-in-law voiced her surprise. "Yes, I make my living through stock trading, earning over $10,000 a month." Of course, I have never told mother-in-law, so you could be forgiven for thinking so. Because she loves money as much as she values education, and if she found out, she'd undoubtedly demand luxury cars and the latest electronics. So, I asked my husband to keep it a secret from her. In fact, since I'm always at home when she calls or visits unexpectedly, she assumed I was a housewife. My mother-in-law was left speechless by this unexpected revelation, simply standing there in astonishment. Here's an answer to a question some of you might have. Why did I contribute to the house's funds for a mother-in-law I disliked? Normally, one wouldn't want to give a single cent. The answer is simple. It was to avoid any talk of living together. By giving her an accessible and comfortable home, I thought she would stay quiet and not bother us, especially after slightly injuring herself. And if she's comfortable in her own house, she'd likely visit ours less frequently. It was an expense for my own peace of mind. Doesn't that sound logical? But now, having completely seen my mother-in-law as an enemy, I said, "Anyway, I want the full $100,000 back. If you can't pay, sell the land and house. If you don't like that, borrow the money from a financial institution." I stated this firmly. That's outrageous. This house is ours now, and I have no intention of giving you a penny. Finally breaking his silence, my father-in-law shouted at her. "How much more do you need to upset everyone around you? Look around. Nobody is on your side." My mother-in-law began to cry as my father-in-law yelled at her. But no matter how much he urged her to apologize, she refused to bow her head. Her pride being too strong. In the end, my mother-in-law left without apologizing or even looking at me. I'm so sorry, Erica. If I had been watching her carefully, this wouldn't have happened. My father-in-law apologized deeply. There was no need for him to apologize. My mother-in-law only bullied me when he wasn't aware. Please lift your head. You've done nothing wrong. Please continue to treat me as your real daughter. Saying this, I placed my hand on his shoulder. My father-in-law said, "Thank you, Erica. Leave her to me. I'll make sure she never bullies you again," and went after my mother-in-law. The people around us also seemed relieved as the situation calmed down. Then, the neighborhood ladies apologized to me and even declared they would cut ties with my mother-in-law, which really lightened my heart. A month later, my father-in-law announced that he was divorcing my mother-in-law. Apparently, it wasn't just about that day's events. My mother-in-law had been having an affair with a highly educated middle-aged man. My father-in-law, who had suspected something was off, had hired a private investigator to secretly gather evidence. The divorce was quickly finalized, and my mother-in-law had to pay the $100,000 I contributed for the renovations as alimony. The alimony was apparently fronted by her lover. In return, she's now being made to work as a maid. My father-in-law reported with a look of disbelief. Now, both my father-in-law and I can live without being troubled by my mother-in-law. I am currently 5 months pregnant, and my husband, father-in-law, and the neighborhood ladies are all very concerned about my health and have been a great help. I guess I have to thank my mother-in-law a little for gaining so many allies. Looking forward, I hope to live a happy life with my soon-to-be-born child, my husband, father-in-law, and our cat, Bella.